So, welcome everybody to our Thursday night meditation session. And as usual, we're going to start with a little bit of focusing on our breath, just to calm the mind down a little bit, and a meditation. And then after that, we'll get into our talk about spiritual realization. So if everybody, if you're at home watching, you can join in with this if you like. And you can just begin by just having your eyes closed. And I'll get my little soundtrack happening here. And I'll guide you through this short meditation. Okay, so have your eyes closed. And just begin by putting your attention onto your breathing. Just focus on your breath. In the background, you can hear this. You'll hear this mantra being chanted, and we'll get to that in a few moments. But firstly, let's just focus on our breathing. On your inward breath, you can notice the enlivening, rejuvenating effect of the inward breath. And the outward breath relaxing. So on the inward breath, we're taking in all the necessary elements for our body, the oxygen, the nitrogen, and so on. Taking in these elements, but we're also taking in this subtle energy, prana, or as the Chinese call it, the qi, the subtle energy that pervades all material nature, and we're breathing that into our body as well. So it's nice to be aware of these two different kinds of inward breath, and just feeling the refreshing nature of that inward breath. And the outward breath, just letting that breath drag out any tension you may be carrying. We're breathing out toxins, and stress is a type of toxin as well, so we can breathe out all the different kinds of toxins. And just this simple focus on our breath is very relaxing for the body and calming for the mind. So oftentimes yogis use this breath focus just to, settle the body, calm the mind in preparation for the actual meditation practice. So on your inward breath, feeling your body revitalizing, the outward breath relaxing. And as you can hear in the background, you can hear this mantra being chanted. So this particular mantra that we're going to start with tonight is Gauranga. And you can hear them in the background. Gauranga, like that, just being spoken with a long, drawn-out outward breath. So for anybody who hasn't done this particular meditation practice before, this is called mantra meditation or yoga sound meditation, where we focus on a transcendental sound vibration, which has the effect of purifying the mind and the heart, and just relaxing the body and calming the mind and so on, purifying the mind. So this particular mantra, Gauranga, it means the golden one. So it's a very beautiful mantra. So we'll just go for 2 or 3 minutes focusing on this mantra. And the way to do it, you just allow that sound to enter into your ears, let it wash over your mind, and just relax with the sound, vibration. Just enjoy the sound of the mantra. You don't need to worry about the meaning or, focusing too strongly or anything like that. It's a very relaxed concentration. Okay, so I'm just going to start doing this practice in harmony with the CD that we've got going, and you're welcome to join in as well at home. So after this one we can take in a nice deep inward breath and then off we go. Lost my voice, so you can keep listening as I'm going to do, or you can say it out loud. For one more mantra and then we'll finish off. You can just switch our focus back to the breath now, our main focus. We'll finish off where we started, just experiencing the rejuvenating nature of the inward breath, relaxing of the outward breath. And usually when we do this meditation, sometimes the mantra will linger for a little longer in your mind, and this is, of course, very nice. This is one of the nice effects of doing mantra meditation out loud. We actually, it makes it so that the effects can linger on, and we're remembering the mantra, and in a sense we're still continuing to meditate even after we've officially finished, so to speak. Even though we're not audibly saying the mantra anymore, it's still going on in our mind. So, of course, so the purpose for this meditation that we were doing, one of the reasons that we have this meditation, a short meditation, but before, a talk on yoga practice, is that firstly it gets us into a good frame of mind. It relaxes the mind so we can hear. We're a little bit more attentive in our hearing when we're trying to understand yoga knowledge. And the other reason is it actually demonstrates how easy this meditation practice actually is. It's so easy. You would have noticed already I tried to say the mantra and I couldn't. My voice, I don't know, I'm having trouble these days with this breathing meditation. My voice isn't able to do it. But it doesn't matter because so I had the aid of this CD, and so I was able to hear the meditation as well. So this is, for anybody who's new to this practice, this is something really you can take note of, that even if you can't actually audibly say the mantras yourself, you can just listen to others, or recorded tapes or CDs or whatever the media is these days. You can listen to pre-recorded chanting, and this is as good as actual saying the sound yourself. So what we're going to do, and the reason, of course, that we engage in meditation is to try to experience this thing which is generally known as spiritual realization. So this is our topic for tonight. What is spiritual realization? And more than that, how does it actually play out in terms of our day-to-day life? What does it mean in terms of our day-to-day life? I mean, does it mean we don't have any more day-to-day life? We just sit there in this, okay, I'm spiritually realized now, here I am, I'm gone. And, I'm oblivious to the world for all practical purposes. Actually, that is one form of spiritual realization that can be done. But as we're going to try and explain tonight, there's actually different kinds of spiritual realization. So before we talk about how it affects our day-to-day life, we just want to, briefly describe there's two main kinds of spiritual realization, and they can be described in different ways, but I'm just going to describe them in a, what will hopefully be a very simple way tonight, just so that everybody can, have a general idea of what we're talking about. And that is, but before we get to that, there's one point we have to make, and that is that all spiritual realization begins with the basic understanding that there's a distinction between you and your body. So I'm going to assume that, most people who practice yoga these days or trying to do some meditation would have heard of this idea that there's a difference between you and your body. We always hear the term body, mind, spirit. So you are the spirit, totally distinct from your temporary physical body. So the first kind, or we could actually call it the stage there's different stages of spiritual realization, and the first stage is to actually experience this distinction. Firstly, generally we hear about it intellectually on the mental level. Somebody will go to a talk and somebody will say, hey, there's a distinction between you and your body, and we'll kind of, take that on board to some extent on the intellectual level, even though we might not have actually experienced it. So the experience comes with what's called sadhana, or practice. We have to have a method, a way to actually tune into this reality. And so the method is meditation. And we gradually, through this meditation, we focus more and more on our spiritual nature. And of course, along with that comes, different kinds of austerities, in a sense, practices which minimize our bodily focus, put it like that. If we're continually focusing on our body in different ways, then of course that's going to distract from this other thing we're trying to do, realize our spiritual nature. So what we're talking about here firstly is you realizing your spiritual nature. So by looking at what is it in a general sense, it's we're talking about a solo experience. It's something that you as an individual are experiencing. It's kind of like a self-contained experience. It's got nothing to do with anybody else, realizing your spiritual nature. So this is what's called a preliminary stage. It's not complete because it doesn't take into account the world around us and all the other spiritual entities. Like, we live in the big city, millions of people here, they're all spiritual too, right? So if we're just focusing on our own spiritual nature, we're not really taking into account these other people, nor are we taking into account the source of all this all these spiritual souls. So in the yoga texts, a part of spiritual realization is to have a complete realization. They describe there's different kinds of realization. One of them is to realize our spiritual nature, like we're saying, and the other one is to realize our connection with the Supreme. And this second kind of realization, where we realize our connection, we're now talking about a spiritual relationship. So that's different kind of realization. So I hope everybody's with me so far. Is that okay? There's a solo experience, just me, and then there's an experience of a spiritual relationship with two completely different things. One is much more complete and the other one is more limited. And so along with the solo experience, there's an extended form of that where one realizes not only their own spiritual nature, but you realize that you are one with everyone else as well. So this oneness, this experience of oneness is sometimes called Brahman Realization. You realize the oneness of all spiritual energy. So this is a really, it's described in the yoga text as being this wonderfully amazing experience where we realize the oneness. And it's from this particular form of realization that a lot of the, New Age philosophies are coming from this idea that it's all one. Everything is one. And when we tune into that oneness, we're tuning into the oneness of all living entities. The planet is one, it's whole, and everything's very wonderful. So I hope everybody's with me so far. And especially, it may be a little bit, I'm sure a lot of you would have come into contact with these ideas in a general way at least. So now we can talk about this in terms of what does it mean? What does this realization of oneness, spiritual oneness, mean in terms of day-to-day life? And so it's all very well, whether we're whatever yoga practice we tune into. Some people like to focus on the chakras, and some people like to do their meditation and so on to experience this spiritual oneness. And again, we're saying if you're trying to have this experience, you have to somehow or other decrease your bodily focus. Otherwise, it's a contradiction. It's kind of like, we've all seen those pictures of rockets on a launching pad and their engines are getting ready to go and they're going to launch into orbit. And the rocket's held by these clamps, right? It can't go anywhere unless the clamps are released. So this may be compared to letting go of the clamps. We have to let go of material attachments, and then the rocket can take off and have this experience. So actually, this process all sounds very good in theory, but it's actually very, very difficult to do this. It's not easily done at all. And the reason is that by nature we're active. Is that right? We're all active by nature. We have desire. And so for somebody to say, okay, you've got to stop all your material desires now because we're going to have this thing called spiritual realization, yes, but it's not easy to do. Very, very difficult to do, to just stop your material attachments. Again, because the soul, the spirit, the real you're active by nature. And anybody who's tried to do this, whether one form of yoga or meditation or another, will know exactly what I'm talking about. It's not easy at all to just, go and sit. We all have everybody knows the romantic idea of the spiritual seeker going off to the mountains or the forest and so on. They're going to, sit like this and meditate and have this wonderful experience. Yes, but it's not easily done. That's the point. And I wanted to, get a little specific about that. Why, in terms of, probably the strongest desire that we all have, and that is the desire for love. So, isn't it a fact that every person has this desire for love? We all have it very, very strongly, except the ones who've been burnt and who want to go off to the mountains. So this is going on, and this is one of the big reasons why people do want to have this romantic idea. Because quite often in our search for love in this world, it doesn't always come off. We of course we all begin with high hopes and so on, but in so many cases people get burnt and over again, and that's why some at least have this idea that I'm going to go off and become a yogi meditator now. I won't have to put up with all this all the problems of relationships. You see, so in our desire for love, there's so many problems that are developed in relationships. Again, anybody who's in a relationship for any length of time knows exactly what I'm talking about. There's always problems, and so we want to get relief. So this is one of the big reasons why people, engage in yoga and meditation in the first place, right? After all, why do it? Why, if life is all fine and I got my loving relationships and everything's great, what do I need yoga and meditation for? Don't need that. Everything's fine. So the very fact that, there's a big, interest in yoga and meditation and spiritual realization is kind of evidence that what we're saying is true. There are, people are very frustrated in their attempts to, not only enjoy life in a general way, but more specifically in their attempts to experience love. So this attempt at this kind of spiritual realization, this solo, again, we'll get to the relationship kind of spiritual realization a little bit, but we want to keep focusing on this idea of a solo experience and this experiencing the oneness. And most people, I think I'm okay in saying that. I haven't taken a poll or anything, but I think, if you take a poll of most yoga schools, a lot of them are teaching meditation and spiritual realization as this kind of solo experience. They're not talking about spiritual relationships. They're not talking about a relationship between you and the original cause or the source. So we'll come to that later. But so most people are having this idea of, just having this experience on our own. And we'll go back to the analogy of the rocket because it's kind of, it's sort of applicable in some ways. So let's say that you've succeeded in this very, very difficult process of releasing the clamps, you've cut all your material attachments, and now the rocket can just sail away. And it comes to orbit, and you're up there in orbit, and spiritual realization, you're realizing the oneness of everything, and this is so wonderful. And what happens from there? Do you just stay like that forever, eternally, in this condition, oblivious to the whole world? You're just in this trance of spiritual realization? Sometimes that happens. People stay in that kind of trance for a long time. But generally what happens is unless a person goes on to experience this other thing we were talking about, this more complete form of spiritual realization where a person realizes their relationship with the Supreme. If we don't go to that stage, beyond orbit, so to speak, if we don't leave orbit and experience actual a spiritual relationship, then what will happen is our inherently active nature and our inherent desire for love will kick in at some point. And that desire will either be directed spiritually, and it'll go to a relationship, a loving relationship with the Supreme, or if we don't do that, it'll come back to, we'll focus again on material relationships. So in other words, we can't stay in this kind of orbit stage indefinitely. It's more or less a temporary stage. And you can the analogy works in the sense that, I don't know the exact science, but you have these, people, these rockets attain orbit, and they have this saying that if it's not kept in orbit by some continual force, then the orbit gradually degrades and the rocket comes back to the Earth. So similarly, if this extra effort is not made to achieve a spiritual relationship and experience this kind of spiritual realization, then this other realization, this solo experience of being in orbit, that will, it won't last. Our desire for love will kick in again. And, I know I've been talking theoretically about it, but anybody who's, stuck their foot in the world of yoga and so on will understand this. There's so many cases of these so-called spiritually realized yoga masters who attain this position of what we described earlier, this Brahman realization, who end up trying to satisfy their desire for love. I don't want to could easily get into being very critical of some people now. They end up in scandalous relationships with, due to their desire for love not being satisfied on this spiritual platform. They end up, having affairs with their young disciples and secretaries and so on. There's so many instances of this going on, and they're all considered to be quite scandalous, that these so-called yoga masters will exploit their followers in this way. They'll have sex with them. But in one sense, this is very bad, but in another sense we can understand it's more or less we can understand why it happens, because their desire for love is not satisfied in this just, here I am, I'm in this solo experience of spiritual realization. That's the point. If a person is thinking in terms of spiritual realization, in terms of a solo experience, it's just me and I'm experiencing something, and sooner or later, if you don't move on to this experience of a spiritual relationship, then you're going to come back down. And so this, and then what happens, of course, they'll come back down, and then, they'll realise, oh, I've messed up. And then, maybe they'll try and go back up again. And so there's this up and down kind of situation going on. And again, I suspect that some of you who have engaged in these kind of, this attempt to achieve this kind of solo spiritual experience will know exactly what I'm talking about. We try to engage in different austerities, meditation. We go up, we get to a point, and then we come back like that. And this happens, this kind of up and down kind of thing happens even in, even people who aren't interested in yoga. The same kind of up and down thing goes on. Just say, for example, a normal person, we live and we work in the city, and things are quite complicated and so on, and sometimes very stressful and traumatic. And we look forward to what? The weekend. Friday night. Friday night, I don't have to worry anymore. I can, go and get relief. Or we go on a holiday. You leave, in a sense. It's the same kind of idea. The rocket. We got to leave this normal existence. We want to achieve something else. We want to experience something else. We want to experience relief. And then inevitably what happens then? And then so we experience one kind of relief or another, maybe in the form of music or food or sex or anything. It could be anything, any kind of, material enjoyment to relieve, try and get some satisfaction. And eventually, though, so many of these practices, they don't work. We go for our country holiday, and I always remember, there was a time before I even started meditating, one of my, I got together with some friends and we went to the country to get out of the city. We're young hippies. Let's get out of the city and go to the farm and so on. So we all go off to the farm. Yeah, this is great. This is wonderful. This is much better than that. And before you know it, somebody's saying, after not very long, somebody's getting bored already and, let's go to the pub. So we need to have an actual activity of spiritual activity. Otherwise, no matter what we do, we can't stay on this solo platform indefinitely. So that's the main point. And so what's the other Actually, we can just talk about that a little bit longer. I can mention a few other things about this solo experience and the effects, the actual practical effects, because it's actually quite interesting to see them. And it can happen because after all, a lot of people are engaging in this idea of having this solo spiritual experience. So what happens when you try and apply that in your day-to-day life? You know, so, okay, I'm spiritually realised, I realise my spiritual nature and I realise the oneness of everything. Now, okay, so now I open my eyes and I'm see myself in the world. Okay, so how does that experience manifest in my day-to-day life? And it manifests in different ways. We've already talked about one way, this kind of scandalous, disgusting kind of way, in a sense where, you know, people have this experience and, you know, some of these big gurus, they end up exploiting their followers. Oh, it's all one, you know, we're okay, you can, you know, have sex with me and so on, and they exploit their followers. This is one manifestation of it, a kind of, you know, one of the worst manifestations. Something which is not so, you know, scandalous like that is where, you know, a person has this very, you know, nice outlook, so to speak. Oh, they've realised it's all one, it's all, we can all live peacefully now. There's no more racism, there's no more possessions. How about that one? No more possessions. That's one of the big, you know, you may recall this famous song by John Lennon, Imagine No Possessions. So, and the idea, of course, is that, you know, if there's no possessions and everybody has access to everything, then of course what problems are there? There's no more fighting, there's no more greed, there's no more, right? So many problems solved as soon as we realise no possessions. But you'll find, despite these good intentions and this good idea in a sense, and actually it's true in the sense that we don't actually own anything. Actually everything is owned by the Supreme, the original cause, or God. But still, in terms of this trying to apply it in practical day-to-day life, of course it doesn't work. You know, I don't know of any one of these big gurus who talks about this idea of it's all one and what's mine is yours and what's yours is mine and so on, actually living it. No, they don't. They've got their big ashrams and their big bank balances and so on. And if you come and say, hey, no possessions, let's put into practice what you're teaching. Can I come and move in on the ashram and so on and just do whatever I want to do? No, you can't. Can I have some money? No, you can't. That's mine. So, you know, it's a nice idea, but it actually doesn't work in practice. And even more, and it can manifest, you know, there's other ways it manifests. It can manifest in really crazy ways where people, you know, are so convinced that it's all one, you know. Having heard this idea of no possessions, it's no possessions and it's all one, you know, what's yours is mine, what's mine is yours and so on. You see people sometimes, you know, actually trying to live that reality in the world, and of course, you know, it doesn't work. They soon come up against lots of brick walls, like I was just saying, put up even by the people who teach that idea of oneness. So it's not practical. It doesn't work. You know, if you're going to try and tell me, imagine no possessions and we're going to put that into practice, okay, I'm going to turn up to your house tomorrow and I'm going to ask you why you've locked the door. Why is your house locked? This isn't yours, right? So we have to ask, are all these people that are teaching about no possessions, are they actually going to put that into practice? So I don't want to come down too hard on this. You know, it's a well-intentioned idea, and of course, you know, that's nice, but we should understand that practically speaking, it's useless. It doesn't have any value. The fact is, you know, and I'll give you just one more example of how actually crazy it can get. I once knew a lady who was really into this, you know, it's all one and there's no possessions and so on and so forth. And she was, I didn't know her that well, but she was coming to learn meditation from me. And she had previously taken on board this oneness idea in a very, very radically strong way. And I was sitting, you know, at home, and we were out in the country actually, and my neighbour on a nearby farm called me up and says, "Look, there's this strange lady in our yard taking our washing off the line." And I went, "What?" And I immediately thought it must have been this lady. So she meant well, of course. So one, I'm gonna, you know, give. But she sort of started acting as if, you know, she was just putting the philosophy into practice. There is no possessions, it's all one. So off she went to the neighbour and started taking in their washing. And of course they were a bit, you know, what are you doing? So this is how it can get really crazy. It can get very crazy if you get a lot of people like that running around doing their thing. They'll just, you know, walk into your house and you try and tell them, "Hey, what are you doing here?" No, it's all one, no possessions, remember. So it can get scandalous, it can get crazy, it can get really weird, this idea. You try and put this idea into practice. So, but again, the actual idea of oneness, spiritual oneness in itself is not wrong. It's a partial truth. But because it's only a partial truth, it can be misused as we've just described. So the complete truth and how we can learn how to focus on the, and we'll call it, it's a higher form of spiritual realization. It's more complete when we start to take into account the individuality of others. So just to, you know, explain what we're saying here, there's a nice, very famous analogy that's used quite often in the Upanishads. You might have heard of the Upanishads, the yoga texts, books of wisdom. Pardon me. And in one of these Upanishads, the Mundaka Upanishad, it's describing the actual spiritual situation, and it describes that the spiritual souls, you, me, each of us, we're like little sparks emanating from a great fire. So this is a really, wonderful analogy, and you can learn a lot from it, so it's worth contemplating it for a moment. So what this analogy gets across the idea of is that there is oneness, but there's also distinction. And just like you can say, okay, there's a big fire and there's sparks coming from this fire, you can say that the sparks are one with the fire. They're part of the fire. They're non-different from the fire. And it's true. There's oneness there. But also we can say there's distinction because that spark is now, the wind carries it far, far away. So what is it now? Still part of the fire. You can still say it's one with the fire, but it's also distinct. And this is the actual reality that each and every one of us can experience. You know, right now, like say there's somebody out there now watching this program saying, "I disagree with everything you're saying. I don't like this idea. You are wrong." That just, right there, you've just proved my point, that there's a distinction between you and me. My consciousness is a certain way, your consciousness is a different way. Someone down the street, their consciousness is a different way too. So this is the little sparks of the fire. We're one, but we're distinct as well. And this, of course, gives us, this analogy also gives us the clue as to what actual spiritual realization is. When the spark remembers and knows and is conscious of its identity as a part of the fire, then this is complete spiritual realization. We realize our oneness with the fire and simultaneously our distinction. And this is what we were talking about before. This is how a person moves beyond that temporary orbit stage of just, okay, I'm spiritual in essence. I'm spiritual. Now what? Now we open my eyes. What am I going to do now? Oh, if you don't become active on the spiritual platform, you will go back down to the material platform. Hopefully in a nice way, hopefully not at all, but if you're going to, at least in a nice way and not a weird, scandalous type of way, which unfortunately is often the case. So this, when a person focuses this spark of the Supreme Soul, the fire, of course, is a metaphor for God, the Supreme Source, the original cause of all spiritual souls. I mean, this is a big question that a person has to ask. You know, like so many people engage in yoga practice and they understand this point about, okay, yes, I'm separate, I'm distinct from my body, but then, you know, you have to be able to understand where you've come from. Where have you come from? Your spiritual nature. It's come from the original cause, the source. This fire, this great fire, this great original cause. So we have to have this, once we have this bigger picture, then we can understand these different kinds of spiritual realization, understand how they, you know, fit in with each other. Like we're saying, this idea of oneness, it's not wrong. It's just that if one doesn't properly understand what it is, and in the context of this larger picture, then, you know, it's not going to be helpful ultimately. So this, in order to experience the spiritual relationship, what's happening when we're engaging in that way, in terms of what we were talking about earlier, that, you know, part of our spiritual nature is we've got this desire for love. You're not going to stop that. The only people that don't want love are the ones who've been burnt badly enough. It's not that they don't want it, it's just that they've been burnt so badly that it's like, as the songs go, I'm never going to fall in love again. You know, so many songs like that have been written about failed love. Isn't that a fact? How many songs do you know where people are talking about broken hearts and failed love and so on? And it gets to a point where someone, you just go, okay, forget it. I just want to be on my own now. Is that right? I just want to, you want to shut the door, you want to go to your room or your house, or you go to the country. But what you really want to go to a country with someone else. Isn't that the truth? You don't want to just go on your own. Only, again, if you've been burnt so badly, you will. But other than that, you want to go with your loved one. True? Of course, it's true. So, again, the highest form of spiritual realization will take this inherent desire for love into account. And that's why, all the yoga texts talk about spiritual love, spiritual love. It's not just me sitting on my own. What's that? That's gonna get boring after a while. You're not gonna handle that indefinitely. But so we'll be looking for this love. So that's why all the yoga texts say, rather than letting your orbit degrade and you gradually come back to, material life again, and then you get problems again, and then you go up again, you come down again. That's a whole nother subject. We'll maybe come to that in another talk, this up and down, up and down. But so we're advised to focus on this spiritual love, direct our desire for love spiritually. And this is what all the yoga texts talk about, putting our attention onto the Supreme Soul. Love, spiritual love, love for God, love for the Supreme, however you want to say it. And when you use the word love, we're talking about a relationship. Isn't that right? Love, loving relationship. That's what it means. I love you, you love me. It's not just like love, I'm here on my own experiencing love. No, we actually have a relationship. There's an interaction. And this happens on the spiritual platform. And it's, of course, this kind of love, it's got nothing to do with what we normally conceive of as love in the physical sense, sex, physical sex. Got nothing to do with that. It's completely on a transcendental platform. Got nothing to do with it. And this is another sign that, talking about going back very briefly, I don't want to harp on it too much, but it's kind of, it's a good point to be aware of. Some of these big yoga gurus, they say they've experienced spiritual realization, and that they get involved with their disciples and secretaries and so on. You notice something about all these relationships? They're always young and pretty. They never have these loving affairs with the middle-aged woman. It's always with the young ones, very young. So this is another sign that they're completely, their whole, in the name of love, it's totally materialistic. It's got nothing to do with this other spiritual love. Spiritual love has got nothing to do with bodily considerations. It's totally on the spiritual platform where a person is relating soul to soul. It's got nothing to do with, body on body. So I'll just finish off. I hope, I have to apologise. I have a tendency to ramble a little bit in my talks, but I hope it's made a little bit of sense to you all out there. And for those of you who are new to yoga and, maybe not come into contact with these ideas in depth, I hope it's especially if it's been not too difficult to understand. And I'll just finish off with one of my favourite quotes from the Bhagavad-Gita. Some of you may know the Bhagavad-Gita, very wonderful yoga text which describes, a number of different varieties, different kinds of yoga practices which make it so that we can, attain this spiritual love, this realization, this higher form of realization. And it's primarily done through the practice of bhakti yoga, bhakti meaning love. So this love, again, it refers to a relationship between you and the original cause, the Supreme Soul. So we all here in different kinds of spiritual traditions. Doesn't matter, they always talk about love for God. So this is what any genuine spiritual path will be focusing on. It doesn't matter whether it's one particular spiritual path or another. If it's directed in that way, then it's a good path and it's a complete path. It's going beyond this idea of oneness. It's taking it further. Yes, there is oneness, but there is distinction as well. And as soon as you understand this distinction, then we can go to the higher stage. And I see if I can remember this verse. I can't remember it off by heart, but basically it goes like this. This is that, and of all yogis, this is Krishna speaking in the Bhagavad-Gita, and of all yogis, those who adore me with transcendental love and devotion are most intimately united with me in yoga and are the highest of all. So this kind of intimate spiritual love is the highest yoga experience, spiritual love, and that's actually the ultimate goal of all yoga practices. It's the highest goal. So somehow or other, sometimes people come to this goal in a very roundabout way. We do a little bit of this and a little bit of that practice. We do some asanas, and our knowledge of yoga increases gradually. And sometimes a person can tune into it very directly and very quickly. So it's kind of like, going back to our rocket analogy again, it's like some people just have a very limited aim. Okay, let's try and get to orbit. Okay. But some people go, understanding that there's much more beyond just this basic stage, they just go straight through the orbit, don't even, boom, go straight past that. And those who go straight past that, what? They're in much less likelihood of falling back down. Of course, that can happen to anyone. Our desire for spiritual realization may be stronger or may be greater. Anybody can, go backwards in a sense. But it's nice to, have the picture, have a bit of a understanding of the bigger picture, and then, whether we're going backwards or forwards, we can aim. At least we know where to aim. And the other point, I've spoken way too long, it's nearly an hour, but the other point I would like to make before we finish off is that when we talk about this thing called spiritual realization, it generally it comes gradually. It can come gradually. That it's a little bit like the sun rising. When we go to watch the sun, a little bit of light appears, and then so enlightenment comes like that. Spiritual realization, it comes generally speaking with practices where we engage in certain kind of practices, especially meditation. Especially focusing on mantra, singing the names of the Supreme. So this puts us directly in tune. Just like, if I sing a song about somebody and say their name, immediately, oh, he's saying my name. We immediately get their attention. So similarly, as soon as we say the names of the Supreme or we focus on these mantras, then we're immediately making some contact, and we're developing a relationship. But it'll come slowly. Generally speaking, it'll come slowly, just like the sun. It'll gradually rise, and eventually we may experience it full. Generally it's like that. It can happen more quickly or more slowly, just depending on the individual. So there's no rule about that. Basically, it's just dependent on our desire. How much do we want this? That's a question for everybody. And obviously, talking about it in this way, everybody will be able to appreciate that it's got nothing to do with joining some group or joining some particular, meditation group or whatever. Everybody, we may come together with other people and meditate, but everybody's, developing at their own rate. That's right. Even some of you come to, kirtan practice and engage in meditation with other people, but it's not like we're all the same. Just like, in a classroom, you might have 30 people in a classroom at university or somewhere. Oh, we've all got the same teacher and we're all in class and we're all going to graduate. Maybe not necessarily. Each person is responsible for their own. We can learn so many things, but whether we put it into practice, each person is responsible for their own situation. Okay, so I'll leave it at that. And again, I hope it's been a little bit helpful for some of you out there, hopefully most of you who are tuning in. And as you know, there's a few different speakers that are coming on this Thoughtful Thursday program. And we're all, talking about the same things, but, maybe in a slightly different way. So I always like to finish whenever I, talk about yoga and meditation and spiritual realization. We always like to have some meditation that goes along with it. After all, the theory is one thing, the actual practice is another. So when we're doing meditation, focusing on mantras, this is actually making it so that the spiritual relationship can develop. So I'm going to, just for probably 3 or 4 minutes, we'll just focus on this mantra, Gopala, Govinda, Rama, Madana, Mohana. So these very beautiful names of the Supreme. So I'll just be saying the mantras. There won't be a gap, and you can just sing along if you like at home, or just listen. Again, this is the beauty of this kirtan meditation or singing meditation, that you can listen or sing along as you like. Gopala, Govinda, Rama, Madana, Mohana. 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 Okay, so thank you everybody out there for tuning in and listening to our presentation tonight. I hope you've all got some value out of it. Thank you.